Previously on Week Slam.
Alright, next week's activity is baking from my cousin Amanda. Hello and welcome to Week Slam with your host Sam, where the goal of my channel is to try out a new hobby, interest, or activity for 1 week straight and give you guys the progress update about what you can learn in 5 days. This week's viewer suggested activity is baking. With the first batch of bread being baked around 15,000 years ago on a big flat stone that was placed over a fire, it's no surprise to say applying heat to flour and water has been around since the beginning. Throughout history, you'll find more examples of baking, like in 7th century Greece, with what looks like an early version of the pizza oven that was made from brick or clay. However, at this time, wheat was expensive and hard to come by, plus the dough making process was still unrefined. It wasn't until the 15th century that the first brick and tile oven was documented in France. There's no question that there were ovens before this, however, they take the cake simply because they wrote it down. Jumping ahead to the Middle Ages, there was a baking boom, with baking becoming a full-time profession and bakers buying flour from mills instead of growing it themselves. Somewhere around the 18th and 19th century, as trade and global exploration grew, people started to add cocoa and sugar from the Caribbean islands to their confections, which put an even bigger demand on baked goods. And finally, with the invention of refrigeration in the 20th century, baking became available year-round and accessible to nearly everyone. Fast forward to today, and baking is just as popular as ever, with countless TV shows and competitions about bakers putting their skills to the test. This episode is actually my audition tape for the Great British Bake Off, so wish me luck. Before we get started, let me explain the scoring system for this week's challenge. After baking each recipe, I'd sample it, usually of friends, and we'd all agree on a score from 1 to 5. The 4 categories for scoring are presentation, consistency, flavor, and creativity. And you add together the score of each, trying to get the perfect 20. So without further ado, let's get to baking. Hello and welcome to day number 1 of learning baking. Today, we're going to be trying our luck at a simple homemade vanilla cake. Let's go. On day 1, mistakes were made. I'm not going to cut myself any slack by saying this is only the second cake I've ever made, with the first one being a box cake, but I will say I rushed a few things and didn't listen to the recipe. The biggest mistake I made was not letting the cake cool before applying the icing, which is especially important with buttercream frosting. The reason this is so important is that buttercream frosting is mostly made from butter, which melts in warm temperatures, so that's why my cake ended up looking like an ice cream cone in the sun. The next goof I made was trying to apply different color icing to the top and bottom layers. I had this cool idea to make them different colors, but didn't realize you need to use fondant icing, which is more solid than buttercream. So that's why my blue and green mixed together, forming a color that looked like Slimer from Ghostbusters. Now, on to the ranking. Our first category was presentation, with an easy 1 out of 5. Next was consistency, with a 4 out of 5. Despite the outside looking undead, the actual cake was cooked pretty well and wasn't burnt or baked unevenly. Our next category was flavor, with 3 out of 5. The cake tasted fine and the icing wasn't bad, but it lacked that extra kick with just the plain vanilla. And our final category was creativity, with a 1 out of 5. The concept was okay, but the execution fell flat. So, our final score for day 1 was 9 points out of 20. Hello, and welcome back to day number 2 of the baking challenge. Today, we're going to be trying to make fudgy layered Irish mocha brownies. Let's jump right in. On the second day, I tried a different approach with some fudge brownies that were made in 3 separate parts. The first was creating the brownie base layer, then baking it, followed by the white chocolate frosting, then the ganache topping, which were both cooled in the fridge to give it its distinct layers. Once they were done, the brownies were a big hit. After we finished tasting them, I donated the leftovers to my buddy Sean, who actually ate all of them in a single day. My only critique is that the recipe called for an 8x8 square pan, but I only had an 8x12, so the middle frosting layer wasn't as thick as in the picture. Our first score was presentation, with a 3 out of 5, since the middle layer wasn't as even as it should have been. Next was consistency with a solid 5 out of 5. The brownies had a delicious moist texture all the way through with no burnt or uneven spots. Flavor was next with a resounding 5 out of 5. With 3 different layers of flavor infused with Baileys, there wasn't a single complaint from any of our tasters. And lastly was creativity with a 3 out of 5, since the brownies were cooked in a basic pan without anything crazy going on, giving us a total of 16 points on day 2. Hey guys, welcome back to day number 3 of baking. Today, we're going to be making some cake pops. Although I will say we're going to be cheating a little bit by using a cake mix for the base, but the rest will be from scratch. Let's jump right in. If you're thinking of making cake pops, my one word of advice is that it's a very tedious process. Overall, the recipe is pretty straightforward, but having to go and roll every single pop by hand, insert the handle, let that cool, take it back out, dip it in chocolate, then let that cool takes a while. While making them, I learned a few extra pointers, like don't make the pops too big or else they'll fall over, which is why we had a few casualties. And whenever you insert the handle, make sure it's far enough in that it doesn't poke through but can support the pop's weight. Our first score was presentation with 3 out of 5, since the pops were a little big and the designs could have been neater. Next was consistency with a 5 out of 5. The cake was baked all the way through and the chocolate was spread out evenly. Flavor was an easy 5 out of 5 with no complaints about their taste. And creativity was a 4 out of 5, since the designs could have been a little flashier, ending us with a total of 17 points. Good morning and welcome back to day number 4. Today, we're going to be making an easy ham and cheese quiche. Let's go. This was actually my first time making and trying a quiche. If you've never had one before, imagine an egg pie with meat inside. They're super simple to make and are a welcome twist on your everyday breakfast. Since I never had one before, I didn't have anything to compare it to, but the tasters said the only critique they had was to try whisking the eggs longer, which gives it a lighter, fluffy taste, instead of that omelet consistency. Going to our first score of presentation, we gave the quiche 4 out of 5, seeing that the top and the crust were a little brown. The consistency was a 3 out of 5, since the center wasn't as light and fluffy as it should have been. Our flavor was a 4 out of 5 because it came out a little salty, and creativity was a 3 out of 5, since I didn't crease the edges or do anything fancy, giving us a total of 14 points. Hello and welcome to day number 5 of baking. Today we're here with my friend Susie, and we're going to be making her world famous bread pudding. Tell us a little bit about the recipe.
Okay, we are going to start with a basic raisin bread vanilla bread pudding, but we are going to change it up into individual helpings.
Cool.
I forgot that I had a couple of mangoes in my fridge, so I decided to cook them down a little bit with some Satsuma rum.
Alright.
Just to make things interesting. We're going to do a lavender. That's always fun. We're going to do a salted caramel and chocolate chip. A peanut butter whiskey.
Oh, wow.
Which is going to be fun. And a strawberry Baileys.
That sounds amazing. Let's jump right into it, guys. Day 5 was a blast. After enlisting the help of my awesome friend Susie, she shared her spectacular bread pudding recipe that was honestly one of the best desserts I've ever had. Since we made so many different flavors, the easiest way to score it was to simply judge the peanut butter whiskey, since it was the biggest batch. Then we'll rank our favorite flavors in order. First off was presentation, with an easy 5 out of 5. It was a perfect bread pudding without any burnt marks. Next was consistency, with 5 out of 5, since it was cooked evenly all the way through. Our next category was flavor, with another 5 out of 5. Followed by a resounding 5 out of 5 for creativity. Putting such a unique twist on your regular bread pudding was a welcome change that earned this recipe a perfect 20. Out of all 5 flavors, our favorites were peanut butter, lavender, mango, strawberry, then salted caramel. And that is it for our week of baking. To tell you the truth, Even if you follow a recipe to the T, there's still plenty of ways you can improve your dish that are learned over time through practice. Which is why I'd rate the difficulty 3 out of 5 stars. With the biggest challenge being able to tell exactly what a recipe needs as you're making it, like mixing eggs or waiting for the cake to dry. If you want to give baking a shot, it's relatively inexpensive and honestly depends on what you're trying to cook. Most of my creations range from about 10 to 20 bucks a pop and can get even cheaper depending on the ingredients you buy. Of course, I'll put the recipes I used in the description below, alongside some of my recommended cooking gear. But let me know what some of your favorite recipes are, and don't forget to tag Week Slam on any of our social media to share some of your baked creations. Alright guys, that is it for episode 9 of Week Slam with your host, Sam. Don't forget to leave a comment below on what activity you'd like to see me try next, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share the video to help the channel grow. Thanks for watching and see you next week. But before you go, we're going to be spinning the viewer suggested Wheel of Slams to find out next week's activity. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay. Oh wow. Next week's activity is